Brutalism was an architectural style that was popular from the 1950s to early 1980s that consisted of raw concrete surfaces, monochrome colors, minimal ornamentation, and exposed structural elements. It is the architectural style that is referenced in the title of The Brutalist, a film directed by Brady Corbet that has been nominated for numerous accolades this year. On this week's episode of Silent Generation, we are going to share our thoughts on The Brutalist before discussing brutalism as an architectural style. The first half of this episode will include spoilers, so skip ahead or hold off on listening if you intend to see it in the future.
Yeah, so you saw the movie 2 days ago?
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Yeah, I saw it, I guess, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, did you see it at Music Box or?
No, I actually went to Landmark Cinema, which is this movie theater that's basically 3 floors of a 7-story building.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned Landmark on our Movie Palaces episode because it was like a grand movie palace, and then I got turned into a mall, which is kind of, I don't think there's a lot of cases of that. And then in a roundabout way, like the mall still had a movie theater in it. But yeah, it's very spooky and lonely there because it's like half dead mall, half dead movie theater.
Yeah. Yeah, I went there during a matinee showing. There were maybe 15 people watching at max, but it was a good experience because I didn't want to be around a bunch of people for 3.5 hours. There was no one else in the row besides me.
Oh, wow. So I saw it at Music Box, which to the listener is like our, movie enthusiast theater, like this old classic movie theater. And this was in the 70 millimeter presentation. And they had a little preface before by this employee of the theater talking about, all the work and labor that goes into showing it in this format. Basically, the reels of film are very heavy and have to be moved around, and they have to be synchronized, and it's just a lot of work. So it was a packed house. And this was also a matinee showing too. This was, I think it started at like 9:50 a.m.
Wow.
Which is the earliest I've ever watched a movie. It was cool to have a whole day after that, by the time we exited, but it was also just mildly delirious because it was just a lot of movie all at once.
Was there a lot of background music box chatter?
There was. It was better behaved than usual. Yeah, we talked about this in a past episode, but yeah, the Music Box laugh is that I guess ironic laugh that Music Box patrons do. There was some uneasy laughter because there's some kind of weird attempts at humor in the movie sometimes. I remember the scene where Laszlo asks Attila, he's like, "Is she a shiksa?" He asks if she's non-Jewish, and he's like, yeah. And everyone kind of uneasily laughed during that because I think shiksa is just maybe one of those inherently funny words. There's just something about its shape.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the movie?
So I didn't like it too much. If I were to rate it, I would give it 3 stars out of 5. I think that it didn't leave an impact. I saw it 2 days ago, but I haven't really been thinking about it that much outside of when I've been thinking about it for this episode. The other movies I saw this year that I was a big fan of, like Notre and Civil War, I thought about them for a week. I listened to the movie soundtrack in order to continue feeling the feelings I felt about the films. Yeah. But with this one, I thought that there were moments where the mood of the film, the very beginning, the tension with the music, and then also the shots of the Statue of Liberty upside down. That was a really great opening. But the majority of the film, it really didn't capture my attention.
Yeah, I guess it kind of did stick with me because I kind of just started to realize this has to be an episode. When I reached a certain amount of time it was occupying in my head. But sadly, the reason I knew I want to make an episode out of it is because I don't think it lives up to what it could have been or what I thought it was going to be. Because the thing is, this is so fully up my alley. I'm obsessed with mid-century modern architecture. It's not my favorite now. My interior design tastes have definitely changed a bit away from it and gone earlier. But I just still love the period. It's it's important to Chicago. It's important to the school I went to, which was seen as a descendant of the Bauhaus.
Yeah.
And so I love that. And also any story about the Jewish American experience, I think is just really fascinating personally to me. And these questions about assimilation and the different waves of Jewish immigrants and whether we'll actually be accepted and assimilated or just used. I love all this stuff. And so to not be floored and blown away from the movie, I don't know if I want to give a number to it, but I think I'd be hovering somewhere around where you are too. I think also the framing of the movie, where from the get, you're all right, it's 3.5 hours. There's an intermission. This is a cinematic event. It was made on a shoestring budget. So, they're real creatives. They weren't just flush with cash. It felt like the marketing around it was just very this is groundbreaking cinema. And it's Adrian Brody. a real actor's actor, you know, where he's always doing like hyper emotional stuff, and he looks kind of fucked up in the movie too. Like he's really skinny and he's gaunt and he's like, you know, playing a heroin addict. But yeah, so ultimately it kind of left me wanting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we are doing this as an episode because I've actually been asking our fans on Discord what movies are coming out next year that, you know, you're excited for, because hint, hint, I've been trying to scout out if there are any forthcoming movies that would be good for an episode. Because the format we've been doing for movie episodes is the title of the film has to be something that can be spun off or could have been spun off into its own topic. So this one's a really good candidate because Brutalism could have been its own episode. We'll talk about it in the later half. So I was actually thinking we kind of missed our window for this, but you recommended doing it, and I'm glad you did.
Just like it gives people more time, like, you know, to see the movie or to decide.
Yeah,
because
it's only getting like a broader release like right now.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't in many theaters apparently. Like it's been available in Chicago because we have a lot of people here, but otherwise most people haven't gotten a chance to see it yet.
Oh wow! I guess that was just my like Chicago like monomania, where I just like only think of it through that lens.
Yeah,
but yeah, so I don't know. We don't need to like run through the like what happens in the movie and stuff, but I think the parts I did really like, I feel like they shouldn't get too many points on it though, because I just really like historical dramas. Anything kind of, I like period pieces, nothing too far back. Like once it gets to like Jane Austen, like Regency period, I think my eyes kind of glaze over. Like I don't, just
like people, about the antebellum South.
Not much for me either on the American side. Just like, yeah, women in large dresses in like very manicured gardens. I don't know, maybe that's sexist of me, but I'm like, someone should die. Like, but no, I like turn of the century stuff. I like mid-century, and the costuming is amazing in it. And then just seeing it in that like 70 millimeter format, like the grain, like the film grain and the warmth. I remember the scene on the crane just looking very good. I think his beard looked a little fake.
His beard?
Yeah, this is the one scene where Adrian Brody grows a beard when he's like shoveling coal.
Oh, yeah, he's
on the construction.
Most disheveled.
Yeah.
Wait, you really think they faked his facial hair?
I think so.
Because it's so easy to grow it out. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, but then it changes the whole like filming schedule of stuff around that. So I think it might have been a wig beard.
Yeah. I think it's easy for movies though to do good costuming because I feel like one of the only areas where we haven't really lost the means to make amazing designs is fashion. Like many movies and shows, the only redeeming thing that I can say about them is oftentimes the costuming. Like I keep going back to that because I feel like clothing is the last physical collection most people have. It's very important, and most people like care about it still.
Yeah, it just feels kind of immune from this competency crisis that people talk about. Like it just keeps on trucking along. People seem to be getting better and better at it.
People who can't do math, people they love dressing up.
Still, I have heard just in the world of streaming, there's just so much more production happening now that it is straining resources. So like I remember reading this one takedown of how much worse the wardrobe and costuming is in House of the Dragon versus like the original series Game of Thrones.
Oh, I did hear about people not liking their wigs.
Yeah, it was the bad wigs in that. Yeah, I guess you could. By the end of that article, I felt like I was fully an expert in wigs. I was just like, yeah, I can't watch the show now. You can see all those flyaways.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so the movie, The Brutalist, is of course like centered around this composite character, Laszlo Toth, and it chronicles his, building of his like architectural masterwork in America. What did you actually think about the architecture?
I was not a fan, and that was part of the reason the movie fell flat, because his magnum opus, which was this community center at the top of a hill, it looked really blocky. And even before, they never really showed it completed because they didn't probably have the budget for that. But the model that he created, it looked so blocky. And I did think people of the time, Brutalists, like their designs were more complex than that on average. It was not exceptional.
Yeah, they're setting themselves up for something really hard, which is that like this is a movie about a creative genius and his works. And then like, okay, you actually have to make the works. You better hope that the person doing that is something approaching a creative genius.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just seems like it almost seemed, I think it's been accused of this actually, but AI generated. So AI was used in the accent smoothing. That's been revealed.
Yes.
But there's this rumor now that they used it to like create, I guess, to come up with the ideas for the building, basically.
I could see it where, that scene where Harrison Van Buren, he's showing Laszlo pictures of the buildings that he built in Hungary, and then he's getting really excited about them. I feel like those could have been AI generated.
I feel like those look simple enough that you could have had like I forget what those people are titled. The people who make little like physical objects, not like
the miniatures.
No, but like there's a whole like I guess job in Hollywood where you make like for Wes Anderson movies, like all the nice printed out things, or like if you're having a pirate movie, like the parchment maps,
like stationary stuff.
Yeah, like doing that kind of thing. And so I think you could get someone to do like a interwar modernist charcoal sketch. And they
not
show
the sketches
his
or the photographs.
Oh yeah,
of his previous like buildings.
Yeah,
so I felt like that maybe, but yeah, that's less clear. It's very clear with the AI being used to make their accents a little bit more convincing. But in terms of the designs, though, like that community center, the model, it was a physical model that wasn't AI generated. Someone must have planned that out.
Yeah,
so.
The model was real. Yeah, I had a lot of friends in the architecture program, and IIT's curriculum is very modeling heavy, apparently compared to other schools' programs. And so it was kind of nice to see like the white foam board again.
Yeah.
I always kind of wanted to help my friends out with that, but I don't know. I felt like you're the architect. You guys signed up for that. Like you can spend all of Friday and Saturday night making your models.
Yeah.
I liked, the building itself. Like I just feel like, oh no, I know what the real brutalism is, and it more often than not
it didn't even really look brutalist to me. It just looked very minimal.
Yeah, but not even in the kind of like charming interwar modernist way. Like that kind of like, in that episode I talked about how I kind of like the rough charm of those. Like they're not as sleek as later works, and they're not soaring, and they're often just like white stucco and little grid window panes. Like there's a lot of charm in interwar modernist stuff, but I just wasn't seeing it in the limited stuff that they showed. I was like excited to see what I do for work being portrayed on there, of like, there's a general contractor character, and he's kind of like a surly American guy dressed in really cool flannel Mackinac jackets and boots. There's a developer who doesn't really know what he wants, but has really strong idees.
Wait, could you clarify these for me? So is the developer the one with the glasses
that would be Harrison. Okay. So Harrison in this, like, it's weird to say developer when it's kind of a non-profit thing. Yes. But yes, he's the client in this case, you would also say. And then the general contractor is Leslie. So that's the glasses. The one with the glasses. He's like the construction manager, the one who's like subcontracting out all the work. And then you have the interesting thing of that other architect they bring in. And so that is just another
consultant. Were consultants even a thing in the 50s?
No, I mean, what they're doing is, and this is why it's a conflict in that, is that they just don't fully trust Laszlo's abilities. And so they bring in a second architect to check his plans and to kind of like sneak in on his work. And I've thankfully never experienced that. That would be pretty rough. I've had clients threaten to bring in their own trades. One of my clients didn't like the painters we were using and brought in his own terrible painters. But I've never had a client bring in like a second set of eyes architecture-wise.
Yeah, it's so hard to build already. A developer would never want to bring in an extra architect just to make things even more convoluted.
Yeah, it's just like, I think, an empty threat. But so I liked seeing that depicted. I liked the study. I like that first scene of them kind of like branching from, just like being furniture to actually like doing an interior renovation.
Yeah, so the movie, 3.5 hours, for some reason he only completes 2 works, one being the library, the other being the community center. Yeah. The library is shown in a more complete state. Yeah. I did like the design of it. The main factor he considered when creating the library or designing the library was that the books needed to be protected from light. He removes the curtains and then puts them behind these like really elegant bookshelves that all open at the same time. So that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I thought that was such like that. It's very like, it shows that the directors really understood like the reframing that happened in modern architecture of just like reclassifying like, what is the purpose of this room? Like, why are we going to have these windows if they're just like serving to hurt the books? And then is this about the books or is it about the person in the study? Like, what is like even the idea of a room being a study? Like, shouldn't it matter about the person who's studying it?
I will say though that the chair that he placed in the center of the room looked uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's like way too far back that I would actually want to read in. Like, it's too reclined. Yeah, and the little book holder posted on it. I don't know. It just like didn't pass my like sniff test towards like, I've seen a lot of mid-century chairs. Actually, the library at IIT has like all of the great mid-century chairs, from the Brno chair to the Vasily chair to the Navy chair. I don't know why I know all these different chairs. But this one didn't like pass the sniff test, like, oh, that could have been a forgotten one. Like, no, it's
Yeah.
just like I could just kind of tell, like, that the guy doesn't belong here.
Yeah, this one, the design, it was very tubular in its shape, and then it had like a leather quilted.
Bands,
Yeah, anyway. It looked like something that would maybe be fun to sit in for an hour max, and then you'd be like, I don't want to sit in this again.
Yeah, no. A very uncomfortable mid-century chair is this. I think it's called the Vasily chair, which is like chrome tubes, like the furniture he was making in that early scene, and then just like leather straps across it. And I remember I had to sit in one of those when my foot was broken, and so I had to get up and down with crutches. And I'm like, I hate the mid-century thinkers. Like, this is just so inefficient.
Was that a chair you owned, or where?
No, I was actually going to a job interview, and they had, to show like how forward thinking they are, they had very uncomfortable chairs in the lobby. I think that's a classic.
It's the craziest thing I've been on top of during a job interview is like a zebra carpet with like a zebra head on the carpet. But my first job was at American Apparel, and then I also applied to work at Lavon. Like Lavlan. Do you know them? I think they're like a competitor to Chanel. I wouldn't really know. I'm not into this stuff.
Interesting.
But there's an alternate reality where I could have maybe kept working in retail as a gay guy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But thankfully I didn't get that job. But I had this interview, and it was so intimidating to be interviewed in this like really rich interior on top of a zebra carpet.
Zebra head on it? I feel like you put a bear head on a carpet. Yeah, but zebra head I have not seen.
But yeah, that shut down, but it was on Chestnut Street.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm a little closer to that area now in my new apartment. And I do just wonder about like, what is it like to work like crazy high-end retail where you have like in some places so few clients a day, but you have to like wait on them hand and foot. And I remember seeing this, like my ex showed me this TikTok of like how they text you, like at a fancy clothing store, like you trade numbers and they tell you like when stuff comes in. That just sounds like a whole level of retail I just do not understand. I don't know. Maybe it's like, I don't know. Maybe it is cool because it's kind of like what we talked about in the department stores episode about how you had your own kind of shopping concierge at Marshall Fields in the day.
Yeah.
Oh, but on the study scene, I was, cringing in my seat when they dropped the glass dome.
Oh, yeah. I felt really bad about that. The preservationist in me was not happy.
Yeah.
I'm sure that they probably made that dome to be broken in the movie, but I still felt bad.
Yeah. It reminded me of this one job I did where we had to lift a 600-pound tub, like with a crane, into a building. And so we get it in, and then we get it through this narrow doorway, and then we're getting ready to place the tub. And it has this rough plumbing piece sticking out of it, like the tub drain. And then we're lining it up perfectly on the hole in the tile floor. And then a guy on the left just drops it. And I just like, it's funny because there's nothing you can do. It's not like you drop it and then you have to like rush to go grab something. It's just like, well, this isn't going to change. Like nothing we do right now like matters. And luckily the tile wasn't cracked, and I guess that would be $4,000 tub wasn't damaged either. We just had to like reorder that one connection piece, but it was like, I was just so built up. I was just like so ready to see this thing get finally done. And it's just like, oh, nothing we can do now. This part's going to take a week to get here.
Yeah. I read a Reddit comment once where someone was talking about when people with bachelor's degrees start working in the trades, and from his perspective, like they never really make it. But he shared this anecdote about how one of those guys, he was moving an air conditioner or something from place to place, and they just dropped it because their arms got tired and they ruined the floor, and it cost like $10,000 to fix it or something.
Oh my God. Because their arms there's so many layers to that are pissing me off. I mean, I have a complex about being the college guy on construction sites. Like I don't want, like, I always joke that like they can smell the college boy on me. But one time I did feel like kind of proud of being the college boy was with this tub. The first time we tried to just heft it up the stairs into this unit. And the guys had this idea. This is hard to explain on a podcast, but basically they're like, oh yeah, just pass a rope through the hole in the tub. Through that, we'll have a group of guys hold one end of the rope and a group of guys hold the other end of the rope, and then we'll just yank it up. And I was like, no. I'm like, what? No, why not? I was like, because the way you've done it here, if one side loses their grip, the tub is in free fall. And they were like, it was like hard
rotating.
Like they couldn't like picture the kind of like secondary steps that I was like, no, what we do is we tie a single rope tightly around like the tub, and then we get everyone on one end of it to pull it up. It still didn't work. Like it could not have worked anyway, but it was like, they very nearly could have crushed someone with the way they had it set up. And I was like, oh my God, maybe it is good that I like studied statics and everything. Like college boy is worth it.
Yeah. So What do you think the Brutalist was going for?
So more than I usually do after watching. Usually I watch a movie, I read the Wikipedia article, and I just kind of like think about it for a bit, and then it leaves my mind. But with this one, I actually started seeking out like interviews with Brady Corbet, because I will admit I haven't seen his 2 earlier movies.
Yeah.
But I was just trying to get into his head. I was like, first, like how much does this guy actually know about mid-century modern architecture? And the answer is like more than most. He named a few different books he had read about it, and this is where he got his thesis for the movie, which is something he said in multiple interviews, which is that the movie is about how wartime trauma informed post-war architecture with the materials, because a lot of wartime materials, the concrete that was used for bunkers is now being used for public libraries. And so it's his commentary on that. And the thing is, I don't think that's a crazy strong thesis. Yeah. Because, like, as we've talked in our interwar modernism episode, like a lot of the ideas they were working with predate World War II. Not a huge amount of them predate World War I will say. So there is a wartime trauma aspect. Technology was pushed forward by war. It always is. But I just don't think that the architectural thinkers of this time would really like cop to that. Would cop to like, oh yes, this is informed by the trauma of war. Yeah. Even if it is in some roundabout way. I don't know. So I have an issue with the central thesis.
Well, brutalism gets framed as being bleak and depressing. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's partly a reflection of the poverty of the post-war era in Europe. But also, it's so often framed that brutalist architecture was a result of communism. So his thesis that it came after this trauma and it's a reflection of that, it sort of doesn't line up with that other conflicting idea that I think most people have. I think it could be both, but yeah, I think it probably is more likely to have reflected something in the present day at the time.
Yeah, so I think it's just a very like also modern kind of concept of how we think about trauma nowadays.
Yeah, we've become obsessed with it.
Yeah, I know, like definitely. And I know you can say that this was like a subconscious, like psychic, injury to the architects of the time, and it was dictating their work, even if they thought they were thinking about higher-minded things. But I think that's kind of unfair to the architects. Like Mies van der Rohe, he wasn't, not to say he wasn't traumatized by the war, he had to flee Germany, like his home, kind of wondering if he would ever return to it. But what was driving the shape and the form of his buildings was a very advanced theory steeped in classicism, but then looking forward to new materials. Like, it wasn't him like searching through his personal life. Yeah. And so I think this is kind of where the filmmaker is making assumptions about how architects think that are a little different. Like, in a lot of interviews, Brady Corbet's talked about like how this movie is about filmmaking. This is about the personal act of filmmaking and getting money from clients and making everyone happy and being an overworked creative. And so I think that he's like, oh, we and architects have so much in common. And then he makes like one step too far, which is that like, oh yeah, we use our personal trauma to inform our work. And I think a lot of architects would be like, whoa. No, I studied for years about like, the shape and design of buildings, and it's not related to that.
Yeah, because it's more of like a STEM profession at this point than it is an art form. Okay, that's very controversial to say, but it is like architecture is viewed as being like a very serious technical consideration as opposed to something that's purely about aesthetics. And I think architects would prefer it was viewed in that way.
Yeah, it's like an eternal struggle in architecture. Yeah. You'll get ones who are much more on the theoretical side. As we'll talk about in a bit with the architect John Macsai, there were those who were much more in the kind of functionalist camp of things, but even those ones like still believed in beauty and aesthetics and all that. It is like an art, but it's an art that's more subject to the real world and other things.
But something that can be connected to this is in art history, there's an idea that if you look at a particular work of art from a particular work of time, there's a synchronism between that artwork and everything else that was happening in society. And you can look at a given work of art and infer what politics were like at that time or what was going on in music. And it's just a very helpful theory or idea to sort of allow art historians to link artworks to other things that were seemingly unrelated. Yeah. And so brutalism, like architects were working with the material constraints of the time, which was they needed to build things quickly and cheaply. And it might synchronize with what was going on in the rest of the world resulting from the war. But I think it could be connected, but it's not very explicit. They definitely weren't thinking like, I want to make work about how I was traumatized, which Laszlo in this movie literally does.
Yeah. And it's like kind of, it's very spelled out for us in the end. I kind of almost forgot about that scene until I was reading an interview, but basically like his daughter spells it out for us and says that like this work looks like the guard towers or the layout of the camp he was kept in, except for the ceiling goes up more. And that was kind of what I thought there'd be more of that thinly spread throughout the movie, where we would see how his camp experience was reflected in the physical architecture. I'm not asking for like a bit by bit, like, here's what I suffered through. Here's how that's represented. Like, I don't need to be walked through that, but I felt like they didn't do anything with it. And at the very end, they like, oh shit, spell it out for us.
It's so unfortunate the movie had so much time and they dedicated so little of it to design, both in that there are only 2 projects that they really explored. And then there weren't like a lot of scenes where he was explaining his ideas. It was only revealed at the end.
And we're also never shown his time in the camps either, which I think was a good decision in the end, because also I just don't really like Holocaust movies is one thing. I don't know, but it was hard to draw that connection. We just often didn't know what's going on in Laszlo's head, which is ambiguity can be, of course, good in that like we can reflect a lot of things onto him. But it was just hard to kind of land and understand like his creative forces. But yeah, another thing Brady mentioned that I think kind of helps, it made me understand the movie's acting a little bit more. He said he was inspired by Douglas Sirk melodramas. He was a director in the 60s, and I actually watched one of his movies last night, and they were derided at the time for being like for women, and they are. Like, halfway through the movie I'm like, I don't think I should be watching this. But they're very dramatic. They're often about like women bristling against the constraints of their time, but there's always like very rich Tony kind of characters looking down at others and just kind of very directly speaking their thoughts, and there's kind of flatness to the characters. And I was like, oh, that's what he's going for with the Van Burens, because they were like kind of so flat as characters, you know, like they were just like, oh, we're the snotty rich people who look down on Jews, like despite being, I think they're implied to be new money, basically, that he had arisen out of poverty and he was now hobnobbing with the rich people.
All the rich people in the film looked so amazing, though. I mean, when you talked about costuming, that's who it came to my mind. Like the men wearing those scarves.
The shawls.
They're called shawls.
Yeah, like the white silk shawls. Yeah,
they look great.
Those are so good. Yeah, I like the little like dinner party scenes. Those were good.
Except the crazy one at the end.
Yeah, except for that one. I guess we'll get to that soon. We'll get to that scene soon. Oh my god, I go for periods without thinking about it, and then I think about it. I'm like, God, this movie. Yeah, another thing that I guess this is how we'll get into it. But Corbett said that the whole film is about reclamation, reclaiming one's physical body and one's career after everything has fallen apart, reclaiming their trauma, and building being this expression of the physical manifestation of what they harbor deep within themselves. So yeah, he's got a lot of body ideas here. It sounds kind of, you've been reading this book, Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, I've been reading it so slowly.
I see it sitting on your I see it sitting on your desk as I like come into your house. And
I'm like for 6 months in a row.
I was like, is this guy even reading this?
But I can see that theme. But it's interesting that it was expressed so clearly with Laszlo's wife and his niece, because one of them can't walk because of her trauma. The other one can't talk because of her trauma. Yeah. But with him, it was like, how is his body holding him back besides that, like,
he needs to do heroin
dysfunction problem in the beginning?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Wait, you're right. Wow. I forgot about that. He's got that. He's got the need to do heroin. Which was just a weird...
Is that really your body holding you back?
Or is that a failure of the spirit? Yeah, and that whole thing was just... It kind of felt a little tacked on. Like, because you can do a whole movie about substance abuse addiction. You know, there's like... The first movie that's... Not the first, but one of the big movies about that was The Man with the Golden Arm, which was one of the first movies to deal with substance abuse, specifically heroin.
Do you know when it came out?
It's in the 50s? Okay. Yeah, so it was very daring.
Because to me, it seemed really out of place that he was addicted to heroin, because I think of heroin as being prevalent in the 70s, but I'm sure it has an earlier history.
He was, avant-garde in a lot of ways. So he was doing heroin early too. But yeah, and so that also feels like, taking a very modern concept of body keeping the score with trauma and applying it to people who didn't think of their bodies as that. They saw them as like tools that they lug from place to place.
Yeah.
And then the most entirely on the nose thing is, I guess we'll talk about it now, Laszlo getting raped by Harrison Van Buren Sr., which is just the scene just pissed me off. It seemed like it's a shock value thing.
Yeah.
The guys on Thought Topics mentioned that like it's not brought up in a lot of reviews, which is true. Like, and actually in all those interviews, I read about this movie. It's not really mentioned either. And it's just the most insane. I was like looking at my friends next to me when it was happening. And it's just, I don't know. I get it. The movie is about how America can exploit Jews and immigrants. Do we have to make it that like
That
on
explicit.
the nose, that explicit?
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, I learned on that episode we recorded with Hot Topics that this scene existed in the film. So the whole movie for 3 hours, literally, I was like, okay, which male character is going to rape him? And I literally thought it was going to be his cousin.
Attila, yeah.
Because there's
that
these
scene.
weird-
That scene with that, with your like limited knowledge of that. Yeah, I would be on my edge of my seat of like, wow, that's just happening in movies now.
Because there's these scenes in the beginning because his cousin takes him in, and there are these strange scenes in the home of his cousin Attila where his cousin is pulling both Laszlo and his wife in for like hugs and kisses, and they're dancing. And it was just like, I didn't really get why that was there either. It didn't seem like normal heterosexual behavior.
It's just the whole like sexual scope of the movie feels like a bit of scope creep. Like this movie is about war. It's about art. It's about the creative process. It's about sex. Like not that this should have been a sterile and sexless movie. Like it's a movie like if they want to fully like investigate a character, they should be investigating all those facets of it. But it just felt like they couldn't do the sex side of it justice.
Yeah, the movie clearly wanted to be transgressive because you wrote somewhere about how in an interview he said his next film is going to be NC-17. He's planning for his films to be like this way.
Yeah, he says his next film is going to be about the body. Is what he said. So I guess he's going for body horror light or something. But yeah, and so I think the runtime, I have nothing to back this up. I think the runtime was decided before anything else with the movie. He wanted to have a long runtime movie with a classic 15-minute intermission.
Yeah.
And so in interviews, he says that he hates the marketing side of movies. He is just a creative. I think he's kind of, this is where he aligns with Laszlo. You know, like he's just a pure artist, like shackled by the constraints of money and reality. But like, why is he so good at marketing then? Why is he on this whole press? Why is he doing such good interviews that I'm able to read as well too? I think he must feel a little bit ashamed of how good he is at it. But yeah, it's the NC-17 is another like attention getting thing. But that's not very original. That happens with like Lars von Trier's movies would get NC-17 ratings, and I think they would get like appealed or something like that.
Wait, okay. I should know this, but is there a difference between NC-17 and being rated R?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Viewed cynically, male sexual pleasure is okay, and female sexual pleasure is not okay in NC-17. That's something that people have accused the Academy of. It's a very unscientific process. I watched a documentary about this back in like 2012, 2013. That was basically just a hit piece on the MPAA about how the voting board is just all these like persnickety old people who are in the American fashion totally okay with violence, but very against sexual themes.
I mean, am I any different?
I don't think you're a huge fan of violence. I don't think you're watching John Wick with your free time.
No, I'm not. But I do think it's falling out of fashion for movies to be transgressive in the way that this movie was with, I mean, drug use may be okay, but all the sex and rape scenes, it just like, I just don't feel like people have an appetite for this as much. I'm surprised it's getting as many accolades as it is.
Yeah. And the thing is, what I also really hated about the rape scene is I really liked the whole Carrara marble scene.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like it was beautiful and kind of dreamlike.
Let's tell our listeners about Carrara.
Yeah.
So, marble, generally, if you picture marble in your mind, the marble you're thinking of is Carrara. It's the most iconic. It's a very white
with little
marble.
Gray streaks.
Is this Carrara in front of us? Probably not.
It might be. I don't know. They have a million names.
Possibly. We have a nice table in front of us.
Yeah.
Somehow they didn't mine it to death, or they're still able to mine it.
There's a lot of mountain to go.
Because it's been popular since the Renaissance. So you can still get it for some reason.
Yeah. It's amazing. Maybe I can find this in time to put it in the show notes. But I was at the Broad Museum of Art, and there was a video triptych, and the theme was 3 different high pressure, dangerous professions. And so one was, it was mining like gold underwater. And then the other one was robotic surgery, like the Da Vinci like robot surgery thing. And then the third one was a superintendent of a marble mining site. So he's this like surly Italian guy in a wife beater out there in the sun. And with his 2 hands, he directs 2 different I guess not forklifts. What am I looking for? Excavators.
Yeah.
That then very carefully cleave off pieces of rock, hopefully not breaking the whole thing and crushing it. And you realize in the scene that he's missing about 3 fingers because it's just such a hard job, and there's always that chance you're going to lose something. And so I just find the whole process of getting stone out. If I wasn't a generalist, like being a general contractor, if I had to choose a trade, I would love to work it in stone. I think it's so beautiful.
Mining is actually it's a very visually stimulating thing. Because like I planned a show actually. It's the only time I ever tried to do this when I was in art school, but it was called Hyperobject Cartography. And we had this artist who she would make art about strip mining.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And her videos were just like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
I could see strip mining places in Las Vegas. It seems so wrong. Like I don't know. I loved back in my video gaming days, the Dead Space series. And that takes place in this future where we crack planets open. We use these devices to split it like an egg and tear it open to get to all the resources on the inside, which is just like it feels like something if we had the technology, we would do that. Because if we're already stripping our Earth of everything, like it just feels like if only we could tear this thing in half like a loaf of bread.
Yeah. Or you can take it a step further, like an Invader Zim, and then fill the planet with snacks.
Yes. Thank you for your detailed Invader Zim knowledge. Oh,
yeah.
Man. We should go to a hot topic before they all close.
Do you think they're closing?
Actually, no. I think that they will always find a way to survive. Like there will always be another, like, just how Adventure Time popped up, when Invader Zim died, like it feels like another thing. And then Gravity Falls and all of these like cartoons that adults like.
Yeah. I think we should do a Scene Kids episode eventually. I think it'd be fun.
So. I have a guest in mind. A recovered scene kid. Yeah, I won't say his name right now, but
yeah. So what were some other like things you think he was going for?
So, I mean, the whole idea of making a composite character is interesting because like the great Bauhaus emigre artists, they weren't in the camps. Like there were a lot of Jewish ones, but because of their connections, they were able to leave early. They were able to find a sponsor in America. I'll go into shortly about the Hungarian Jewish, then American architect John Macsai. So he came to America on a Hillel scholarship, but after he had survived Hungarian labor camps. He alternates in interviews saying labor camp or concentration camp. Yeah. But that's kind of where the similarities with the character Laszlo Toth end, because he didn't just, not to say he wasn't traumatized, but in all the interviews I read with him, he very rarely talks about his experiences in the camps. And if you can draw a line to his architecture, like he did a lot of residential architecture. He basically wrote the book on it. It was this book on multifamily housing that had 2 editions and just rave reviews. It really like brought a lot of people up to speed.
Was there a style he worked in? Was it Brutalism?
Some of his works could definitely be called Brutalist. It was broadly like mid-century modern architecture. So he went to school in Hungary, kind of like undergraduate, and he said it was an amazing education. So they taught tons of architecture history. But then they also had Bauhaus related people. So it was very forward like thinking, but it was also really rigorous too. There was lots of sketching and he was very insistent on that. I said IIT was focused on models. When John Macsai was a professor at UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, he was very sketching focused. He thought that you have to be able to picture stuff in 3D while you're drawing in 2D. And his biggest difference from the character of Laszlo Toth is that he's hilarious. He is so funny. It comes through in all the interviews with him.
And we'll link one in the show notes. Yeah. It was from the Art Institute, right?
Yes. So that's like the transcript, but even that had me like laughing out loud, actually. Yeah. And if you want to hear his actual voice, he's in an episode of the podcast 99% Invisible. So
is he still alive?
No, he passed away in 2019. Okay. I believe. This episode's from a while back. But basically, he designed this hotel in Lincolnwood, Illinois, kind of unglamorous northern suburb.
Wait, was it the Purple Hotel?
It was the Purple Hotel.
Wait, he did that?
That's John Macsai.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Not to dox my dad, but he goes to this building sometimes. I won't say why, but it has a brick from that building in the building.
Yeah, they were giving them away afterwards. But so it was this mid-century modern hotel complex, I think for Hyatt. But then when it came time for the infill brick, because it's like a concrete skeleton basically, but you have to infill it with something, so it's bricks.
Yeah.
And he gave all these samples to the client, who's A.N. Pritzker. So one of the Pritzker family, rich beyond measure. And A.N. Pritzker chose purple. Not a light purple either, a very, very purple. And
it
so
makes me think of Grimace.
Yeah, it is Grimace-like, Grimace-esque.
Yeah.
Grimician. And yeah, in a lot of ways, it's his most famous work. He doesn't want to be remembered for that. And if he gets remembered for the Purple Hotel, he wants people to notice the exoskeleton of it, not so much the color.
Yeah. Because designers will say that when they meet with clients, if they present something that they consider to be their least favorite option, then usually the client picks it. It's kind of just how it goes. And that probably is what happened for him.
Yeah, he said to give him like a huge booklet of it, and he really regretted it after.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he pops up in so many ways in Chicago architecture. The work he is most proud of, he says in his interviews, is Harbor House, which is this high-rise condo building on Belmont and Lakeshore Drive. It's very like classic mid-century, but it's got some funky like rounded square protrusions on it. In his interviews, he says he has mediocre buildings out there, which I think is so great to hear from an architect. But he says that's what having a partner in an architecture firm is for. You just blame them for it. So yeah, and the sense of humor is just, of course, like missing in the Brutalist. But I think it's closer to that kind of like Jewish American experience. Like, yes, we can be a mopey people sometimes, but specifically with being a Hungarian Jew, he says in this interview that Hungarian Jews have an ironic sense of the world. Like, because I think many Jewish populations feel this, like they're asked to do competing things. You have to assimilate, but you have to be distant from us.
Yeah.
Like they feel these schizophrenic demands, and so they have to kind of become appropriately schizophrenic in response. But he says about having a sense of humor, he says this: I tell you, your sense of humor and your ability to be ironic about the world, to me, is as important as your health. No money should buy that. I mean, my freedom of being critical of anybody, including myself, and being able to laugh at anybody, including myself, is one of the most precious possessions you have besides your loved ones.
Oh,
I think it's amazing. Like and architects can be a self-serious sort. That's the kind of stuff that Mies van der Rohe wouldn't say. It's a little sappy for him, for that German piece of stone, as he was called.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then so in terms of his experience in the camp and forming his work, his daughter in an interview said that only one time did he really talk about his experience in the camp to her. She had accidentally washed a red leotard in the washing machine, and it got everything in the load pink. And she was really embarrassed, but she told him about it. And he told her that in the camps, he was doing the laundry for the guards, and he accidentally got everything pink, and he was about to be killed. And then just one officer was like, nah, like let him off. And then so that's why you mentioned that. He took her to buy a new red leotard, never talked about it again. And the other time it comes up is he became a professor at UIC, and he was just a professor, but above him was the postmodern starchitect Stanley Tigerman, another Jewish guy, much more assimilated, born in the US, a really forceful figure. He wanted to push the school forward and make it kind of less grounded and make it more theoretical and about the art of architecture and historical reference and wit and all these big, buzzy postmodern ideas at the time. And a lot of people were pushing it back against it. He was also just kind of a mean guy as a director.
Yeah.
And so John Macsai led what's been called the Palace Revolt, which is where he got all the architecture professors together to talk to the dean and get Stanley Tigerman fired while he was on vacation in Japan, which is, I don't know, it sounds so dramatic in the interviews. You think about it, and it's like, this is just like an HR dispute, basically.
Really? Is that a lighthearted guy getting his boss fired?
Yeah. But yeah, and then in a not so lighthearted turn, like what he said to the university like dean was that, since I have been liberated from the camps, I have never felt as humiliated and fearful as I feel every time I teach in the school because of Stanley Tigerman. This is a Jewish guy talking about another Jewish guy. Like, this is kind of like, I feel like there's almost a more interesting story here than there is in the Brutalist. Not that I'm going to be capable of making it. I can't write. I don't know how to make a movie. And it's definitely not as grand in scope, and it's a little more complicated. But I think the story of John Macsai is a more real exploration of the Jewish American assimilation architecture experience than the Brutalist is.
Yeah.
So I think we can end the part where we're spoiling the movie and everything, and we can start talking about Brutalism as an architectural style.
Yeah. So we made a Pinterest board. We have some examples there if you want to get a sample of what Brutalism looks like. I included mostly the Brutalist buildings that we like, but also I think also the ones we're going to talk about that we didn't like. But to start out, we can say where the term brutalism came from. So brutalism comes from béton brut, which is just the French word for concrete. It was coined in 1955 by an architectural critic, and it happens to have this additional association in English of brutal, because the buildings do look very imposing and severe.
Yeah, I was finding stuff about like a possible earlier origin of Nye Brutalism, which is a Danish guy talking about a new brutalism. And then that term was picked up by Danish architects, then picked up by English architects, and then really put to paper by this architecture critic, Banham was his name? Yeah, Rainer Banham. But yeah, because of that like easy English word you see in there of brutal, like it, people put 1 and 2 together. And I think it's one of those like, not everyone knows the word, but people who know the word like to use the word. It just feels like it's a fun thing to say.
It's one of the most recognizable architectural styles, not even of the mid-century, but just in general, because it does feel like it was a pretty radical change from what had come previously. So to start out, we can talk about like, do we like it as a style? So a few years ago, I would have said I outright disliked it, but I've become a bit more mature. And I do think there are some examples that I do like.
Yeah. I mean, as just a broad mid-century fan, I don't know. I seem to like the glass boxes more. I think that they're still imposing, but they also seem to soar, and they have a lightness to them that I think can get lost in concrete. And also there's just that like, reinforced concrete only has a really good lifespan of 90 years. Like cracks start to show. It takes a lot of like deep reinvestment into a building. Not that steel doesn't have rust and all these other things, but yeah, it's just not my favorite side of the modernist world.
Yeah. I think I like it aesthetically in terms of how there's very small windows and how patterns sort of occur on the texture of the buildings. But what I don't like in particular is just the land use around brutalist buildings, because typically when they were built from the 50s to the 80s, they were put in places that had previously had the traditional pattern of development, and they sort of interrupt the urban fabric of the city and call a lot of attention to themselves in a way that I think is a bit ugly. Yeah,
it's imposing. You're talking about the existing urban fabric, and it's Strong Towns uses that term fine-grained, like that it's like lot by lot, all these different things, and then brutalist structures can feel like a spaceship that have landed somewhere. They're imposed from above.
Yeah, like an entire city block might get demolished, and then they put like one really massive brutalist building in the middle of it.
I think that's one of like the fairest complaints about not just brutalism, but the mid-century style of civic and skyscrapers is their use of plazas are just very disconnected from how humans use them. And I can see how this happens. I took one class in college called visual training, where the curriculum is like untouched from the Bauhaus days. And there's visual training 2 and 3 and 4, and that's when you start working in 3D spaces. And I never took these or anything, but you get this sense that in the like Mies van der Rohe model of things, like the placement of a rectangular volume in a plane can be done in this perfect way of their spacing, where they reference each other, and there's no talk of human beings in any of this. It is truly about the most abstracted classical idea of two forms, and then just like people have to deal basically after that.
Because architects can always put little people in their models or draw them into the scene. That's not necessarily how it's going to happen. The plazas are usually bigger than they need to be. But the sense of them sort of interrupting the rest of the city, it makes me think of something that Chuck and Abby talked about on Upzoned, the Strong Towns podcast once, where they were discussing architectural styles and how a lot of modern architecture, the architects, they should think about the city as a wedding, where there should be like one building that's getting the most attention, whether it be a church or the tallest building. But then when there's architects who are just sort of doing their own thing, it's like someone showing up to the wedding in jeans,
That's very true. One building I can think of that really like has a deference towards established buildings is surprisingly Trump Tower in Chicago. It has 3 setbacks on it, and each height of the setback corresponds with a historic building next to it. like with the Wrigley building and the Tribune building, and a third thing I can't think of right now. But, it's, I don't know. It shows that it's referencing, it's contextually like responsible.
Yeah.
It knows what's around it.
Isn't it the third tallest building in the city?
Yes.
But no, I'm just thinking like maybe the third setback is referencing the Hancock.
Oh,
Or at the top
it
of
is.
it.
Yeah, it is very at the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be something else.
Yeah.
Trump, I mean, people always accuse him of various types of penis envy and all that stuff, but he does always want to have the tallest building possible in a city. He chooses cities, so that's very hard, we'll say. In Las Vegas, he has the tallest hotel, but the Stratosphere is a taller structure. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the Trump Tower here is the only building I've seen in the country with this name on it. But the one in Las Vegas, does it have Trump's logo?
It has it on the top. Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that the penthouse at Trump Tower is the tallest residence you can rent in Chicago.
Yeah.
So that's something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we can stop talking about Trump Tower and talk about buildings we like, brutalist buildings that we like.
Mm-hmm.
So one that I saw this year that I was particularly enamored with was the Cathedral Metropolitana de São Sebastião in Rio de Janeiro. And so that's like the biggest Catholic cathedral in the city. It's in the center of downtown. And it's this conical shape that was designed like a Mayan pyramid. And there's 4 really large stained glass windows that are made out of glass blocks. And those are like 200 feet in length. And so because it's so large, like 20,000 people can fit inside of it standing up. And it's this massive interior space that does feel pretty holy once you step into it.
Mm-hmm. It looks like, I don't know, I always like Mayan references in architecture. I think it's really cool. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright got into it. There is something just so powerful about it. It looks like it's from Blade Runner a little bit. There's some like either trapezoidal or pyramidal building in Blade Runner.
I mean, I feel like when brutalism's at its best, it kind of looks like Dune's aesthetic.
Yeah, like it's built by like
aliens,
robot ants, like alien robot ants.
Yeah.
No, it looks like it's such a beautiful building, and I think that brutalism is weirdly well disposed for religious structures, because at least I don't know, like I've been to the Vatican, like it's truly beautiful, but there is this like horror vacui kind of thing where it's this fear of empty space, where like in the Sistine Chapel, it's like, to look up, everything pulls your eye up, of course, but like where up? Like everything is happening. They show like every scene from the life of Christ, and then all these references to obscure saints. Like there's just too much to look at. And I think, I don't know, I've always liked a kind of simpler theology, and I think that's well represented in brutalism. Like just a single cross.
It gives you more space to think about things.
Yeah.
But I had that experience recently because I went to the University of Notre Dame, which is one of the biggest Catholic universities in the country. And I got to see their church and all of the relics from the saints. There was like probably 100 in there. And there was like a book that I could have spent like 2 hours being like, okay, where did all of these come from? But while I was there, I also got to see the Hesburgh Library, which is the only brutalist building I saw on their campus, which is ironic because so many colleges have brutalist libraries.
Yeah, at least one. I think it just lines up with a lot of like, post-war growth and enrollment. Like that's going to cause an increase in library size. Your old building from the 1920s or 1890s like doesn't fit it anymore. It's time to get a new building, and the current style is mid-century modern by way of brutalism. Yeah, and so you end up with it.
And there started to be like newer technologies for storing information, like microfiche. I'm not sure when those came out, but there were more options by the beginning of the 80s than there were in 1950. So there was a reason to build new libraries. But this one is 13 stories. One side of it has this really beautiful mural called The World of Life. It's also referred to as Touchdown Jesus, and it's Jesus with his arms out. There's a bunch of saints around him as well as like scholars and thinkers. But it kind of is the sole reason I like the building, I would say.
That's fair. Yeah, without it, there wouldn't be a lot going on.
Yeah, if it was just like one side of it was just blank concrete, there's nothing redeeming about it. So I don't know, maybe I'm not like a true brutalism enjoyer if the 2 first examples I think of, I'm liking them for their decorative elements.
Yeah, no shame in that. I don't think I'm a true brutalism enjoyer either. I think that I like brutalism that kind of falls in line with what's also called new formalism, which is mid-century modern that's very into the classical proportions and like regularity.
Like more symmetrical.
Yeah.
Because brutalism oftentimes is asymmetrical. Like there's some wild examples. Like there's this one building on our Pinterest board that's from Naples. And I mean, they're just staircases going to nowhere on the outside. I don't really get it.
No, it's like the World Trade Center by Minoru Yamasaki. It's considered like new formalist.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, that's a lot of concrete. Like that's like, why isn't it brutalist? Like there can be, of course, like a line in all of those, but I like buildings that soar. Or so I would say, rather than ones that kind of squat.
Yeah. And then another like brutalist, well, this isn't a building, but the Washington Metro. Have you ever been to Washington, D.C.?
I have. I don't think I ever took the Metro, but it's got a Chicago connection. The stations were designed by Harry Weiss, famous Chicago architect.
Yeah. And these stations are a really good example of brutalism. Like even people who hate brutalism will say they like the DC Metro because they have these beautiful coffered ceilings designed by him. Yeah. And it does give that like Dune designed by aliens feeling.
Yeah.
And the whole Metro is relatively new because they only started building it 48 years ago. And so all 98 stations were built in the last less than 50 years. So they're pretty aesthetically consistent.
Yeah. 98's a lot. That's actually very impressive.
Yeah, because, there are 6 legacy transit cities. The only ones that were built more recently are San Francisco and Washington, D.C., and that's because those are some of the richest places on Earth.
Yeah, I mean, sheer amount of money.
All the money that's getting funneled
into existence.
Yeah, all the money that's getting funneled into federal employees in the D.C. metro area. They're putting that to good use by building the system. But that's one of the only reasons they're able to like have such a big one.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm a big Harry Weiss fan. He actually has a pretty brutalist place of worship in Chicago, the Seventh Church of Christ Scientist, which is on Wacker Drive.
What does that look like?
It's squat, and it's gray concrete on the outside, and it's like a round circle. It was used in the movie Divergent to be like the choosing ceremony place.
Is that okay? Well, it must be near 55.
Oh yeah.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And then, not a typical brutalist building, but I still want to include it anyway, is while we're talking about religious places, is the Bruder Klaus Chapel by Peter Zumthor. So this was built in 2007, but it is basically like a concrete exterior. And the interior of this chapel was made by binding a whole bunch of thin tree trunks together, kind of teepee style, basically. And then they poured the concrete around it, let it set, and they burned all the wood on the inside like a chimney. And then so this chars the inside and results in a scalloped, fluted like interior to the top. And it's just it's atop a hill, kind of like the Institute in The Brutalist. But it's a very like solemn and solitary place of worship that's really about like a personal connection.
Yeah. I saw pictures of it for the first time this week for the episode. It's really pretty. Yeah. And it was built for farmers, I believe, right?
Yeah, just like a whole bunch of farmers in Germany had a hill, and they wanted this saint, like Bruder Klaus, like is related to that area somehow, so he's kind of their patron saint. It just feels very old. Like it's a new building, of course, but it's the way it comes about, like a whole bunch of farmers wanting to pool their money together for a place of worship. Like it just doesn't sound like something that happens anymore. So it feels like it's always been there in some sense. Yeah. And good architecture should feel like that, of course.
Yeah. And looking at it, it made me think about the dawn of everything, because in the book, David Graeber, he talks about where the origins of buildings sort of came from. And essentially people who were hunters and gatherers, they started to build temporary religious structures when they would be less mobile for a certain period of the year. But then those became more permanent. So basically, the origins of buildings come from religious structures in a way. Mm-hmm. And so this one having an exposure at the top where water can come in, it just reminded me of that. It feels really ancient and sacred.
Yeah. It's like a little inhospitable.
Yeah.
Like it's not totally like protected.
It's not quite a building yet.
Yeah.
It's in between.
I have a soft spot. I love civilizing forces of history and all that, but I do love a like neo-primitivist kind of back to basics approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like a building is really a building until it has a roof. That's part of why people get so excited when there are ancient ruins where the roof is still there.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's kind of bridging, before we talk about buildings we dislike, something I'm kind of in the middle of the road about is UIC.
Oh, yeah.
So this is University of Illinois at Chicago, kind of late to the college game. So it had been a campus at Navy Pier previously, and then they started building a campus in the neighborhood of Little Italy. And they called it the Circle Campus because it was close to the highway interchange. So it was the only, place of higher learning named after a highway interchange. Pretty unique.
And I think it opened kind of late in 1983, which is towards the tail end of when Brutalism was being practiced as an architectural style. But pretty much the whole campus is still like that.
Yeah. So we're like other schools have these kind of growth rings. I said earlier, 1890s, these are our buildings when we got founded. 1920s, this is when we ran into a whole bunch of money before the Depression. And then 50s, 60s, this is our kind of post-war GI Bill boom. And we had to build enough stuff to for all the students.
Yeah.
Since UIC doesn't have that, it's just kind of one period. It's just and it's the whole master plan and a lot of the great-ish buildings were designed by Walter Netsch, who was younger, so he wasn't directly in the Bauhaus tradition, but he learned from a lot of directly Bauhaus guys. And he had this very complicated field theory that was all about rotating geometric shapes to create psychological variety for people. And I think it's kind of a lot of hooey. I think it actually works.
Well, you know what I learned through doing research this week? It's actually an urban legend where basically most Chicagoans will say this, that the design of the UIC campus is so bizarre and random because it would disrupt student protesters. They wouldn't know where to go. There's not a lot of places to group together. But I found an article called "Were Brutalist Buildings on College Campuses Really Designed to Thwart Student Riots?" And it says that a lot of colleges had this rumor that spread, even if they built a single Brutalist library.
I heard it at Northwestern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had no idea. But I really think UIC is the strongest candidate if
if it's true, it's true at UIC.
Yeah. But no, it's not really, because the movements of the late 60s and 70s, by the time this was built, they didn't really know they needed a plan for this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's almost like the stuff I've read about Walter Netsch and his bizarre field theory, no, he had the students, unless he was lying, he wanted to create psychic variety for people. He wanted things to be interesting to look at and to stimulate people.
Yeah.
And also the original plan had these suspended concrete walkways, these skyways that would connect people across in hopes that it would be more pro-social. It wasn't. It kind of isolated the student bodies from the neighborhood around it. But I don't like urban legends that assume nefarious intent. I just think, I don't know, I'd rather have a positivist urban legend.
Yeah. But you can't control them. It's just rumor.
Of course. I don't think it's true, but there's that urban legend that the carbon and carbide building, the gold accents on top of it are champagne bubbling down in the time of Prohibition. There's no way to prove that. No one wrote that down. But I will take a positive urban legend over the administration wanted to crush all dissent with brutalist buildings.
I thought it was so believable, though. I really, up until yesterday, thought this was real.
No, yeah. And then at UIC, they have the tallest building is, I think it's called University Hall. And that, a lot of brutalist buildings feel like they loom over you, just the raw expanses of concrete. But this one actually gets bigger as it goes up. So it's physically overhanging and looming on you. It's maybe the most on the nose of the brutalist buildings. It kind of makes sense. It's a late brutalist, you know? It's the final gasp.
So I don't know if I'm missing it, but why is this in between? What is it that you like about UIC's campus?
Consistency. They went all the way. They didn't have to do it and it is part of a master plan. And the fact that there's no there's brutalist buildings at University of Chicago, and some of them kind of half try and go for the color scheme of the original collegiate Gothic buildings they share it with. And so I feel like it's kind of brutalist, but it's feeling sorry about it. And this one is, unapologetic and consistent and part of a master plan. Yeah, so I respect it for that, even though I don't think it's the prettiest.
It is very nice when a college campus has aesthetic consistency, like Notre Dame. I didn't know. I mean, that felt like the nicest place I've been in for a square mile, ever. It's because they have $20 billion to do whatever with. So whenever they build a new building, it's in a traditional style, but executed in the 2020s. I'm really impressed with them.
No, yeah, when college campuses are done right, they feel strangely idyllic. Maybe we talked about that in the past. People tossing frisbees on the quad.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then we can talk about two buildings that we don't like.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of these out there besides the two we're talking about. Brutalism is generally a disliked style by the public. It's viewed as ugly. And Boston City Hall is oftentimes given the moniker the ugliest building in the world. It was designed in this like former walkable area, the west end of Boston. It was an area that they wanted to clear. So they just plopped their new city hall in the middle of it. And it has that like imposing quality that we talked about a little bit, where it just feels like there's so much empty space around it and it's in the heart of Boston. It doesn't really make sense.
It's a gigantic plaza. And it's like, it's strangely asymmetrical too. It's just mid-century plazas. They're either too symmetrical and sterile, or they're like not symmetrical, also still sterile. Like, it's just not that we should bring back like, you know, Louis XIV like lined gardens and stuff like that, but
H.H. Holmes at a minimum.
Yeah. Wait, H.H. Holmes, the serial killer guy?
Oh wait, no, who's the one who did Central Park? Frederick Law Olmsted. Okay,
Olmsted.
so whoops. Okay.
The Frederick Law Olmsted, like the kind of like natural romantic style. Yeah, that kind of public space.
Yeah.
People love those.
I like those a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, you said here that like the place that they, you know, destroyed to build this was a raucous entertainment district filled with burlesque theaters and lowbrow entertainment. I would have loved to see that, man. I wish we had one of those nowadays. I mean, I don't know. I guess like Hubbard Street is like that in Chicago, and I hate that. So maybe I like raucous entertainment districts in theory, but not in practice.
Yeah. And that quote is from an article that came out this week, because the building was actually given a landmark, a local one by Boston's Landmark Council. And, you know, good for them, I guess. I don't know why they felt the need to protect this. Personally, though, I don't think this is the worst Brutalist building. I kind of like the inverted shape. It's a bit pyramidal.
Yeah. Like a reverse of the Brazilian church.
Yeah. I don't hate it, but I don't see why they felt the need to landmark it. I think it probably should get replaced. Yeah.
Yeah. And then our next building is quite an quite an ugly little guy. The Blue Cross Blue Shield building was the original tenant of it, but 55 West Wacker Drive.
Yeah. So this is right along the river. I passed by it many times for years. It stands out a lot because it's so short. It looks like it's dying to be replaced. It's not. It's just like, it has a big 55 on it. It has concrete. Like, what else can you say about it? It's not really special.
It's like you should start reaching for things like, oh, the concrete columns are really wide. Like usually they're wider than steel, but these are really wide. And then the concrete surface itself is rough and striated, or like linearly scraped. Like kind of combed.
It's not even just like concrete. Something about it feels like yellowed.
Yeah, it's like an old computer. It's like an old like PC computer that undergoes yellowing.
Yeah.
That's due to what's it called? The fire resistant plastic breaking down. The yellowing of computers. You know, I don't know why I know that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's so ugly, and it's like, I don't know. It's not even so ugly it comes back around and is cute again, like a pug. It's not.
Yeah. And there's actually like a walking tour in Chicago, like the Ugly Buildings tour. And this is one that like you learn about it when you go, because it really just like sticks out.
I should give a tour. We should give tours. We kind of gave a tour.
To Brianna.
Yeah, to Brianna. But unconventional tours like that are interesting. When I was in Copenhagen, they were advertising like the politically incorrect tour. I'm like, that's going to be cringe. Yeah. I don't know why, but it's just going to be cringe.
Well, you know, I used to give campus tours. So,
are you good at walking backwards?
Actually, yeah.
It's that's what they always develop, walking backwards.
Yeah, I think it helped develop my now podcaster voice too. I know how to enunciate.
Yeah. Did you have like bits you would always do?
Well, yeah, but the way that they would do the tours, it was very specialized. So like sometimes I would just give a tour to one person. It was rarely a big group. So I got to really tailor things for people. Yeah. And then I didn't really pad this out, but I think we could try to talk about it. But the movie, The Brutalist, in it, Laszlo is from Hungary. And Hungary it has a head of state that Viktor Orban, who gets construed as being a fascist. And as part of that, he has had this initiative to build traditional architecture throughout the city. Do you think that the movie in any way might have been intentionally set with a Hungarian protagonist in order to talk about how Viktor Orban is replacing brutalist buildings?
So in the interviews I read, Brady Corbet actually says that he was thinking about Trump in this. Because Trump because he's been marinating in this idea for like 7 years, but Trump had that directive in his previous term about, make American civic architecture beautiful again and get rid of brutalism and replace it with, just classical revival, everything, which is funny because in his own buildings, he doesn't do that. Interiors wise, Trump has, pretty classical tastes or transitional tastes. But yeah, the exteriors, he always goes for glass clad skyscrapers, whatever's like in the moment, like, just buy the best architecture you can, like to show that you spent the money on it. So that's something he mentioned. But yeah, and then to go back to our friend John Macsai, like being of Hungarian extraction, like he actually did a lot of like sketching and studies of Hungarian vernacular architecture too, which is like really beautiful and unique. All vernacular architecture is unique.
Yeah.
But that's not what Viktor Orban's going for. He's going for a general, classical, half-remembered kind of revival.
Yeah, that's another critique of brutalism that I forgot to mention until right now. But the aesthetic, it's very top down. It's not bottom up. I mean, it just screams bureaucracy because typically the buildings in the brutalist style, they're like government buildings, libraries, city halls.
Institutions of some kind.
It just looks like something that put society in debt.
Yeah, it's coming from on high. It's just like you walk past and it's like, oh, they demolished this? Oh, they're putting some kind of government like building here, and it was made by connected people and like all their buddies, and everyone got a good buyout on it.
Yeah, because you can just say you dislike it aesthetically, but it's like practitioner or like believers in the strong towns conversation, like, yeah, these buildings are not probably like a fiscal plus. Like, I mean, in many ways.
I think I've seen very few like vernacular brutalist buildings.
I know, they're rarely used for residential homes.
Yeah, rarely for that. But I've seen like mid-century dental offices, or sometimes like facades that were clearly like on a stretch of Chicago buildings, you'll see like just a completely like rough concrete facade with very small windows. And it's like, yeah, usually a medical office. I don't know why they're so...
I saw one actually on the walk over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good fit.
Yeah. And so like it could emerge in semi-naturally, some dentist is redoing his office and he wants to show he's hip and with the times. So he gets it done in a brutalist style, but that's not the typical. It's coming from on high.
Yeah. And so I think Trump might have actually reinstituted his declaration this week for building government buildings in a classical style. And to sort of round things out, I want to pose the question, do you think brutalist buildings should get preserved?
Yeah, only the good ones. Only the best ones. I don't know. I know it's boring, but I think that this is where those like panel discussions of a whole bunch of retired architects and then some community input and agonizing meetings, I think this is what they're best for. Is sussing out like, the best like examples of this style. And then if something is like not serving its needs, is very energy inefficient, like is really a drain, doesn't fit what people need nowadays, like, let's replace it with something
I bet it's
better.
hard to get these places LEED certified.
Oh, yeah. No, and largely built before the ADA as well. Oh. So they're like old. They're looking modern, but they don't even have the actual modern thing you need, which is like accessibility. John Macsai said that he wanted to write a third edition of his book, like to cover ADA access and all that, but he couldn't get enough money from publishers. Very miserly man.
Yeah. So my take on this question is basically, I think brutalist buildings largely deserve to bite the dust. There are examples that we should preserve, like the Cathedral of São Sebastião and the Hesburgh Library. But overall, architects defended this style on the grounds that it was economical to use concrete and it was sort of realistic or practical. And the demands of the public to continue building in traditional styles, that was a need that couldn't be met. And they were just being childish essentially for wanting that. But now, 50 years pass and this cheap material that is not like a tried and true building material, or it is, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, but no, like, concrete has been around forever, but steel reinforced concrete has only been around since the 1880s or so, and we
Yeah.
know it as a shelf life. The steel part that it's so dependent on is always going to be
Corroding.
liable to corrosion. Yeah, and so yes, it can be an extremely hard material to like fix in any way.
Yeah. But I just think it's sort of like retribution, but I think it's sort of what these buildings deserve, or the architectural community deserves, is for them to be torn down, because the buildings that the public has the impulse to like, they happen to be very durable, and they're derided for liking them. But no, low key, they last longer. It's actually a better way to build. So they're kind of getting what they asked for.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that Trump's directive is coming from an assumption that a lot of people have, which is that architects have their idea of what is beautiful and correct, and it's out of step with what people like. And that is sadly like that is largely true in a lot of ways. Like this is something, not to bring the guy, I'm going to bring him up all the time because I think he's an amazing person. Everyone should know about him. But John Macsai in his writings talked about like, you know, this architectural kind of Illuminati that would just be separate from people. They'd over philosophizing all this stuff. And they wouldn't think about like how people actually use spaces. And if architects kind of forget about their contract with like the average person, then things can go pretty awry. Yeah. It's a wedding, you know? It's a building is being wed to the city. And I think the architecture, whether they like look down on the average person, is also in a rough contract. Because it's people who decide whether these buildings stay up, you know? And not everyone reads the architectural review or whatever.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful analogy to conclude with.
The wedding.
Yeah.
Mazel tov.
Well, thank you for listening this week. So listeners, you know, we look at DMs, we actually like them. And if you do hear of any movies that are coming out this year that you think might be a good Silent Generation episode, please let us know. And thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.